Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We're looking at Imam Razi's Al-Qanoon Al-kulli. And last time we looked at the meaning of Aql and Naql, and then various meanings of Al-Aql, that is reason. And today we are going to look at two more concepts in his title. The title is الفصل الثاني والثلاثون في أن البراهين العقلية إذا ثارت معارضة بالظواهر النقلية فكيف يكون الحال فيها. So you need to understand what ta'arud mean and what Al-Zahir mean here, because the claim is that what should happen when the certain rules of indubitable rules of reason or principles of reasons are in contradiction with the apparent meaning of the text. In that case, obviously, we can't accept both of them, because that will amount to accepting a contradiction, which is against the very principle of understanding and reason and the basis of even a minimalist rationality. So we have to make a choice, so whether we, in those cases, what we do, and that is his Al-Qanoon Al-kulli is about. Okay, so let's look at ta'aruz first. What does contradiction involve here? At-ta'aruz, التعارض or contradiction in general. In its strict sense, two claims are contradictory when that's the strictest sense of the at-ta'arud or contradiction, when they can't both be true and can't both be false. So we have to accept one of them and reject the other, because accepting one or the truth of one the truth of one implies or falsehood of the other. So if we are talking about naql and aql, reason and the text, so if the strict contradiction means that either this is true or this is true, and if this is true then this is false, and if this is true then this is false. So they can't combine, and we can't not take any position on either of them either. So that's the strictest sense of contradiction. But what about more lenient types of contradiction. For example, contrary or tanafi. In tanafi is more lenient conception of contradiction or type of contradiction, because the only restriction here is that they can't both be true. So either of them can be false. That is not a problem. And if one of them is true, the other must be false. That's the only thing, because they can't both be true. So can this hold between them? So this is text and this is aql. The thing is, the sahih text is always true. That means in that case this must be false. So in that sense, an aqli sahih must be true as well. But in tanafi they can't both be true. So it means they can't have a relationship of strict ta'arud. They can't also have the relationship of tanafi. Okay, what about taht al-mu'arida or tabayun? The third relationship, subcontrary. The subcontrary, the condition is that they can't both be false, but they can both be true. But since Sahih Aql and Sahih Naql, the clear text and the correct principles of reason can't both be false. That means they can't have a relationship of subcontrary. That obviously they can have a relationship of contrary, can't have a relationship of contrary because they can't both be true in that relationship. But they must both be true if they are both certain principles, aql and naql, and they can't be subcontrary because they can't both be false. And they can't be strictly contradictory because they can't both be not true and both be not false at the same time. They can't be contradictory because truth of one cannot involve falsehood of the other if both of them are the true undeniable principles. So it seems like when we talk about ta'arud between, there can't be ta'arud between al-aql and reason and the received or transmitted knowledge obviously we are assuming that the principles of reason we are talking about are actually the principles which are introconvertible or undeniable. So they are correct principles. We are assuming that, and with the transmitted knowledge, we are assuming that their transmission is without flaw, and also their understanding is correct. So that we are assuming. Assuming that, then we can say that they can't have any type of ta'arud, either the strict contradiction or contrariness or subcontrariness, ta'arud or tanafi or tabayun or taht al-mu'arada. They can't be opposed to each other in any sense, provided both certain and beyond doubt to be the members of their categories. So the principles of reason are actually correctly understood, a undeniable principles of reason, and the principles of transmitted texts are also certain in both transmission and understanding. Then they can't have both any of the relation of contradiction, contrariness, subcontrariness, ta'arud, tanafi, tabayun, taht al-mu'arada, and so on, for the reason I just explained. So again, we are talking about incontrovertible principles of reason, and we are talking about incontrovertible transmitted knowledge, both in terms of its transmission and in terms of its understanding, which is a good way to transition to the fourth and the final concept, that of Al-Zahir. So this relates only to the transmitted text and their meaning. So meaning of a text from Quran and Sunnah as-Sahih has two possibilities: either they are wadihud dalala or they are mujmal or ghair wadihud. So just the opposite of wadihud dalala or mujmal mean which are not wadihud dalala, ghair wadihud dalala. And dalala mean signification or meaning. So the texts of Quran and Sunnah are two types: wadihud dalala and ghair wadihud dalala. Wadihud dalala are those texts whose meaning is or signification is clear. Meaning is unclear for various reasons. And mujmal obviously is of two types: permanently mujmal and only relatively mujmal, in the sense that some of ijmal or unclarity or ghair wuduh is lifted through time with the increase in human knowledge. But some of the ijmal is permanent because it belongs to the realm of which we have no clue, or most of us have no clue about. So in this world they will remain mujmal. For example, knowledge of the nature of divinity and the whole divine realm. So we are Al-Zahir belong to only Wadihud Dalala, so we aren't going to talk about ijmal anymore because there's no question of at-ta'aruz between mujmal and al-aql because they are different level of categories. But there can be a contradiction, a possibility of contradiction, or appearance of contradiction between reason and the meaning of texts which are clear meaning of text. Now, but not between all types of clear texts. So we have to differentiate between two types of wadihud dalala. Now, among wadihud dalala, we have two main types here. An-nas in its specific meaning, because an-nas in its broad meaning include wadihud dalala as well as mujmal. But an-nas in its specific meaning is a type of wadihud dalala. So among wadihud dalala, there are types of texts which are an-nas and the other which are al-Zahir or al-Zawahir. Both are clear texts, an-nas and Zahir. But an-nas has only one possible meaning in the Arabic language of the time of the Prophet. Only one possible meaning, and that's a clear meaning. So there can't be any contradiction between aql, reason, and an-nas. After we have determined that obviously in Quran there is no question of transmission, it's ma'soom, but it's sunnah if transmission is sahih. An-nas cannot contradict reason, and if they seem to contradict each other, it means we have to assume that the principle of reason we are claiming to be incontrovertible is not incontrovertible. So we might have misunderstood that principle of reason. And obviously we can also check the transmission if it is sunnah, but as far as an-nas in itself is concerned, it cannot contradict reason. Reason cannot contradict it. And if reason does contradict it, then we must reject that principle of reason as not fault of a reason, but fault of our understanding of reason. Okay. So now the only possibility of contradiction remains between Al-Zahir and the reason. And Al-Zahir are those clear texts who has more than one possible meaning. Linguistic meaning. And the context of this meaning is always the Arabic of the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So more than one possible meaning but one meaning among those is linguistically overwhelming. That is rajih. So although there are more than one possible meaning in that context, in the context of the particular text, one meaning is immediately overwhelming. That is rajih, its mutabadir meaning. Its immediate meaning is overwhelming. And that's what we call Al-Zahir, Al-Zahir. And we always take Al-Zahir unless there are other non-linguistic reasons, but good and overwhelming reason to not take the overwhelming meaning and take the other overwhelmed meanings, that is marjuh meanings. So in that sense, this marjuh meaning would be known as mu'awwal, and the process would be known as ta'wil. So we can abandon the overwhelming meaning, but only if we have good reasons to do that. And those reasons vary according to, one of the reasons can be if the overwhelming meaning goes against the other clear texts, for example, an-nusus or ijma' and things like that. So Rajih is like an-nas, with the exception that it has marjuh meaning, which sometimes can become Rajih if there are reasons in its support. So now coming to our own topic. So before we go that, just to give you an example. For example, imra, a woman, in the context of Quranic verses and ayat. For example, in the context of so the word imra, for example, in Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hadith, ayyum imratin nakahat aw unkihat bighayri izni waliha fanikahuha batil. In Arabic language, imra has more than one meaning. It can be a woman, it can be a girl, it can be an older woman, but its zahir meaning is women generally. So in the context of this hadith, there's no other overwhelming reason to treat imra as, for example, a girl, for example. That is its marjuh meaning. So its overwhelming meaning is to take imra as woman in general, not specifically a older woman or younger woman, because unlike Ahnaf, there doesn't seem to be any other good reason to divert this word from its obvious overwhelming meaning to its other less overwhelming meanings. Okay, so that's Al-Zahir. So the question of contradiction between reason and text come into play in terms of the texts which are Al-Zahir, that is, they have more than one meaning. And if their overwhelming immediate meaning sometimes seem to contradict the incontrovertible principles of reasons, then what are we supposed to do? That is Imam Razi's Al-Usul, Al-Kulli, or Al-Qanoon. Al-Qanoon, Al-Kulli is all about whether we can do Tawil based on rational principles, because the overwhelming meanings goes against the certainties of reason. And it seems like if that is the case, then we should accept a meaning which the certainties of which are compatible with certainties of reason. But the main thing is Al-Zahir, when to decide which meaning is overwhelming. What we have, the context is the linguistic understanding at the time of the Prophet. Because there can be a Zahir, immediate overwhelming meaning, which is the result of education. So through education, your minds have been trained to accept certain meaning as overwhelming meaning, and they have been cultured into thinking that that overwhelming meaning is against the principles of reason. But that is not the contradiction between reason and Al-Zahir, because Al-Zahir, when we are talking about Al-Zahir, we are talking about the overwhelming linguistic understanding of the Arabic speakers, or the language of the time of the Prophet ﷺ. That's the context, and that will become important in understanding Imam and critically evaluating Imam Razi's Al-Usul Al-Kulli. We'll stop here, inshallah.